The sterile hum of fluorescent lights filled the NASA research facility, a constant reminder that this was no ordinary place. Posters of rockets, planetary systems, and galaxies adorned the walls. Supercomputers hummed in the background, their blinking lights like artificial stars trying to imitate the vastness of the universe. The air smelled faintly of coffee, printer ink, and the metallic tang of machinery. And in the middle of it all sat a boy, Ethan Cole, 9 years old. A red sweater, slightly oversized, clung to his small frame. His brown hair fell into his eyes as he typed furiously on a silver laptop, the Apple logo glowing like a beacon. His fingers moved faster than those of most grown engineers, his eyes scanning lines of code that looked like nonsense to everyone else. To Ethan, it was music, a rhythm only he could hear. Behind him, a group of NASA scientists in white lab coats stood frozen. They had expected a child to fumble, maybe type random gibberish. Instead, they were watching history unfold. Dr. Meredith Clark, head of computational astrophysics, whispered under her breath, "This is impossible." To her right, a younger scientist leaned closer. "He's not just solving the equations, he's rewriting them." And then there was Dr. Jonathan Hales, the man in the suit, the director of the entire program. His hands clutched his bald head as if holding in the sheer disbelief. His eyes darted between the glowing screen and the boy. "What have we brought into this lab?" Ethan didn't notice their stares. He was lost in his own world. Numbers danced in his mind, cosmic patterns aligning like constellations. To him, solving these equations wasn't work, it was play. The computer screen displayed NASA's most advanced simulation, the chaotic gravitational patterns of exoplanets orbiting a distant star system. For months, the brightest minds at NASA had failed to stabilize the model. Every attempt ended in collapse, data streams crashing, simulations failing, predictions proving unreliable. But Ethan's mind saw something different. He didn't just see math. He saw the orbits like puzzle pieces, like a symphony out of tune waiting for the right conductor. Tap, tap, tap. His fingers danced. He inserted variables, redefined constants, changed the flow of logic. He wasn't following NASA's methodology, he was inventing his own. Suddenly, the simulation's chaotic spirals snapped into order. The star system stabilized on the screen. The gravitational chaos turned into an elegant, repeating rhythm. The lab gasped. One scientist muttered, "Oh my God, he solved the Kepler instability problem." Another whispered, "No. He bypassed it. He rewrote the entire predictive model." Dr. Hales staggered backward, hitting the wall. His face turned pale. For decades, NASA's brightest had tried and failed to decode this anomaly. And now, a 9-year-old had just cracked it. Ethan looked up from the laptop, blinking innocently. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, his voice soft. The silence was heavy, then dry. Clark stepped forward, her voice trembling. "No, Ethan, you just did something none of us could do." The boy smiled faintly, though he didn't fully understand the gravity of his actions. To him, it was like solving a tricky puzzle. But to the scientists, it meant something far greater. Ethan had just given humanity a way to predict planetary systems with an accuracy that could change space exploration forever. And this was only the beginning. Milky Way to be continued. The first time Ethan Cole remembered feeling truly alone was at a piano. He was 5. His feet dangled above the pedals, his sneakers knocking softly against the polished wood like shy echoes. The living room smelled like lemon oil and old books. Afternoon sun pooled on the carpet in warm squares. His mother, Lauren, hovered in the kitchen doorway, pretending to dry a plate that had been dry for 5 minutes. She didn't want to rush him. The piano had been Ethan's father's, oak, heavy, and tuned to a story that had ended before Ethan had learned to read. "Just play what you hear," she'd said. The song Ethan heard wasn't a song at all. It was the hum of the refrigerator and the hiss of the radiator, the click of a neighbor's bicycle chain, the rhythm of a passing train, and beneath all of it, a steady pulse, the tick of the living room clock pacing every second with military discipline. He pressed one key, then another, mapping sound to pattern. He wasn't composing, he was decoding. When Lauren realized what was happening, She stopped drying the plate and leaned against the doorframe, biting her lip and smiling at the same time. Her boy was building order out of noise. That became a habit. Ethan listened for patterns everywhere. The tiny stutter in the ceiling fan that meant a screw had come loose, the zigzag of a sparrow's flight that predicted where it would land, the shifting shadows on the sidewalk that told him when a cloud would thin. Patterns were safe. Patterns meant on the other side of chaos lived a structure you could touch. His father, Captain Daniel Cole, had flown cargo planes for the Air National Guard. He used to lift Ethan onto his shoulders and point at the night sky. "That's your map," he'd say. "It doesn't change. If you can read that, you'll never be lost." But maps don't always bring people home. A training mission ended in radio silence and a soft knock on their apartment door. After that, Lauren worked double shifts at the hospital. Ethan learned silence could be loud. He learned that grief wasn't just sadness, it was math missing a variable. School was fine. Teachers noticed. They used words like gifted and advanced and too much for 4th grade. One wanted to skip him to 7th. Another wanted to let him be a kid. Both were probably right. Ethan could take apart a remote control and put it back together blindfolded. He could also forget to tie his shoes. He knew the names of all the moons of Jupiter. He sometimes forgot the names of the kids in his class. He wasn't better than them, just tuned to a different frequency, the kind only a few radios could pick up. On Tuesdays, while Lauren worked nights, Ethan stayed with their neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, a retired systems engineer with a laugh that filled the hallway. Mr. Alvarez had a garage that smelled like sawdust and solder. He taught Ethan how to hold a soldering iron like a pencil, how to respect heat, how to breathe when your hand wants to shake. Together they made a radio, then a robot arm that could pick up grapes without squishing them, then a telescope mount that tracked the moon like a slow, patient dog. "Hardware is truth, Mr. Alvarez would say, tapping the workbench. "Software is poetry. You need both." Ethan's poetry arrived as lines of code. At 6, he discovered Scratch. At 7, Python. At 8, he could move through a terminal like a city he had built himself. He liked puzzles that didn't care about age, ones that rewarded patience and punished shortcuts. He'd fall asleep on school nights with his laptop closed on the floor and scrap paper stuffed under his pillow, full of sketched-out algorithms that looked like treasure maps. The thing that changed everything started with a public dataset. NASA's exoplanet archive had an open portal. Blurry starlight, time series photometry, the faintest dips where transiting planets crossed their suns. The site was meant for students, hobbyists, anyone curious enough to squint at the faint shivers of distant suns and infer worlds from shadows. Ethan wasn't supposed to be on the site past midnight, but rules were elastic when your mother worked the ICU and your mind refused to power down. He wrote a script to clean the noise, then another to detect transit signals, then another to flag irregularities, the places where the dips weren't periodic enough to be planets, or too periodic to be noise. Most of it was junk. But then there was dataset 196412b, noise that wasn't noise, dips that weren't dips. The pattern looked wrong in a way that felt right. He ran it again, then again with different thresholds, then again with a custom filter he made after reading a forum post from a PhD candidate who, if he'd known a 9-year-old was combing his footnotes, might have rewritten them out of embarrassment. The results held. Ethan felt that familiar tingle in his chest, the one he got when the edges of a jigsaw piece finally kissed. His email to NASA was short and unfussy. Greater than hello, I think your pipeline might be overfitting on dataset 196412b. I built a different residual filter and found a non-Keplerian periodicity. If this is dumb, sorry. If it's not, I can show my code. Ethan C., age 9. He hovered over the send button for a full minute, then clicked. He expected nothing. The universe doesn't usually answer when you whisper into it. It answered in 47 hours. Not the universe, NASA. Dr. Meredith Clark wrote first. Her message was precise and curious and shielded by a professional warmth that said she was used to people writing with big claims. She asked to see his code. He sent it. She asked him to join a Zoom call. He tidied his hair and changed into a fresh red sweater because red made his mom smile and it made him feel less invisible. On the call were 4 people with initials after their names and a 5th who didn't speak much but watched everything. They asked him questions that were kind but sharp. Ethan didn't know what he didn't know, so he said, "I'm not sure," when he wasn't sure, and "Here's why I did it that way," when he was. He could tell when he had surprised them. The tiny delays between question and follow-up, the way their eyes flicked sideways, the slight smirk on the quiet one's face. At the end, drive. Clark said, "Would you and your mother be willing to visit our facility in Houston? We'd like to collaborate." Lauren insisted on 3 things. That she be present for everything, that Ethan have a tutor so he didn't miss schoolwork, and that if at any point it felt wrong, they would leave. Dr. Clark agreed to all of it. The paperwork took a week. Ethan studied orbital mechanics in the back seat of an Uber on the way from the airport, because when the door of the world finally opens a crack, you don't waste time. The NASA building smelled like fresh paint and hopeful coffee. Security was soft but professional. Badge photos were awkward. Hallways were carpeted in a gray that tried to be modern and landed on sensible. Posters on the walls showed mission patches like family crests. Ethan touched one, Apollo 8, and felt something like a handshake across time. They met Drive, Clark in a conference room where the projector was always 2 minutes away from working. She was taller than on Zoom, hair pulled into a bun that meant business, smile that meant kindness survived business. "Ethan," she said, shaking his hand. "I'm glad you're here." She shook Lauren's, too. "Nurse Cole, we're honored." "You can call me Lauren," Lauren said, eyes taking in every exit, every badge, every detail that might become important in a hurry. "That's what the ICU teaches you. Scan, assess, be ready to move even if you hope you won't have to." The 5th person from the call, Drive, Jonathan Hales, joined them halfway through a tray of cafeteria cookies that had no right to be. As good as they were. He was in a dark suit that fit perfectly without trying to impress. He smiled rarely but sincerely, like a man who saved his smiles for when they mattered. "So," Hales said, after introductions. "The boy who wrote a filter that embarrassed our pipeline." Ethan's face flushed. "I didn't mean to embarrass anyone." "Good." Hales nodded. "Then maybe you'll embarrass us again." They moved to the lab, where the ceiling lights hummed and the air was 10 degrees cooler than anywhere else in the building. People wore lab coats for reasons that were only sometimes scientific. Sometimes a lab coat is armor, a signal, a way to say I belong here before anyone asks. Banks of monitors glowed with code and colorful plots. Ethan's hands itched the way they did before a piano performance. "Here's the dataset you flagged, Drive," Clark said, pulling up Windows. "We'd like to reproduce your results on our hardware and then stress test the approach on additional systems." Lauren sat on a rolling chair in the corner, a crossword open but untouched. Her gaze never left her son. Ethan put his fingers on the keyboard, careful, steady. He wasn't nervous, exactly. He was alert, like his father had taught him. Read the map. He installed nothing without permission. He explained every step like he was narrating a cooking show. He forked his repo into a sandbox and rebuilt his environment inside their rules. It wasn't fast. He made it fast. He swapped in a few compiled routines where pure Python had been plenty on his laptop but would choke on their volumes. "I don't need to do this," he said, "but I want to respect your compute time." That got a few eyebrows. Respect for resources was a language engineer spoke. When his filter ran, the room leaned forward. The spikes smoothed. The noise flattened. The odd little heartbeat of 19-6412b surfaced like a whale cresting in gray water. There, then gone, then there again, just off the rhythm a planet should have kept. "Doctor," Clark exhaled. "It's real." One of the postdocs, Jenna, squinted at the screen. "Or it's a system interaction we haven't modeled. 2 planets tugging, exchanging momentum. Except the phase drift isn't gravitational," Ethan said, not looking away from the plot. He felt impolite interrupting. "I mean, not in the classical sense. I tried injecting synthetic signals at adjacent frequencies to see if I could reproduce it. The response curve, it's weird." "Weird how?" Jenna said, not unkindly. "Like it's being nudged." Ethan hesitated. "Like the star's brightness is being modulated from outside the system." Silence. In science, weird is a 4-letter word and a siren. It can mean discovery. It can also mean you bump the apparatus. "Show us, Drive," Clark said. He did, methodical, Disciplined, the way Mr. Alvarez had taught him to respect heat. He toggled layers on and off, ran null tests, flipped the sign of his residuals to make sure he wasn't seeing ghosts. The weirdness stayed. Okay, drive, Clark said at last, and looked at Hales. We need access to the raw feed for the Aquila array. Hales folded his arms. Aquila's not public. We won't publish, she said. We'll verify. Lauren closed the crossword. Will this put my son in the middle of something he shouldn't be in? Hales met her eyes with the honesty of a man who knew the right answer and the true one weren't always the same. We're not going to expose him to anything dangerous. But curiosity has a way of finding the middle of things. Lauren nodded slowly. Then you find the edges and you stand there. Ethan's heart knocked against his ribs, more from his mother's calm fierceness than the data. He felt small and seen at the same time. He wondered if his father had ever felt like this on a runway, a mixture of fear and joy so pure it made you sit up straighter. They moved into a smaller room that smelled strongly of air conditioning and purpose. Hales typed in a code that even Ethan didn't try to read. The Aquila array came online. A set of deep space photometers designed to stare at selected star fields and refuse to blink. Live feeds spooled across 3 monitors. On the central screen, a status bar crept forward. On the right, new raw data crawled into a buffer like ants returning home. Before you touch anything, drive, Clark said. Tell me what you expect to see. Ethan rocked back in his chair, thought, then leaned forward again. If my filter's not hallucinating, Aquila should show correlated brightness modulations that don't match transit profiles, stellar oscillations, or instrumental artifacts. They'll be quasi-periodic with a phase drift that tracks something not gravitational. He frowned. And if I'm wrong, it'll be boring. Boring is okay. Boring pays the bills, Jenna said, smiling now. He ran the filter, carefully, with logging cranked to max, each step producing a trail that anyone could audit. Patterns emerged. Not planets, not stellar noise, not nothing. A whisper riding on starlight. It wasn't shouting, it was patient. He glanced at the glass wall. A dozen people had gathered, drawn by the gravity of other people staring at screens. Hales stood behind them, hands on his head now, not in panic but in that universal gesture of I might be watching the front row of a miracle and I want my hands where I can feel them. Dr. Clark, Ethan said quietly. I think it's not the star. Her voice softened. What is it, Ethan? He pointed at the residual plot where the drift had resolved into something more structured. It's like someone is dimming the light from outside. Like a shutter. Not regular enough to be a Dyson structure, not random enough to be dust. It's encoded, Jenna whispered. No way. Lauren, from the corner, said nothing. But her fingers were white on the edge of her chair. Ethan added, almost apologetically, if it's nothing, I'm sorry. Hales finally spoke. Kid, if this is nothing, then nothing is the most interesting thing I've seen in 20 years. The room laughed, a release valve hissing. But beneath the laugh was an electric quiet that meant even the jokes were listening. Dr. Clark nodded toward the keyboard. Okay, Ethan, show us how you'd try to read it, without making any irreversible changes, on a copy of the data, full audit trail, and no outbound network. Ethan smiled. A small, shy spark. Yes, ma'am. He built a sandbox, cloned the buffers, layered in a simple, conservative decoder. Nothing exotic, nothing that could fool him into seeing a pattern a human brain wanted to see. He tested on injected fake signals to calibrate his expectations. Then he pressed enter. The first output was gibberish. Good. If it had been perfect on the first try, he would have distrusted it. He adjusted the window. He normalized the amplitude. He tried a different basis function, one he'd doodled once in a margin on the back of a bus ticket when the streetlights outside had blinked in a rhythm that only he noticed. The plot transformed. Random became textured. Textured became organized. He didn't say alien. He didn't say message. He said, because Mr. Alvarez's voice lived in his head, we may be seeing a non-natural modulation with a repetition interval that suggests intentionality. Jenna exhaled a single syllable that might have been a prayer or a curse. Dr. Clark put a hand over her mouth and then down again, like she'd almost tried to catch the moment so it wouldn't spill. Hales stepped closer to the glass and didn't realize he had. And out in the hall, people who had only come for the coffee clutched their paper cups like talismans. Lauren stood. Is anyone else thinking about what happens if this is true? She asked, calm but edged. Because my 9-year-old is. Ethan didn't look away from the screen. Mom, I'm okay. I know you are, she said, and her voice was the kind you use when you tell a patient the IV will sting but you'll hold their hand. Hales turned toward Drive. Clark, we go dark on this. We verify, she countered. Both, he said. We verify and we go dark. Until we understand what we're looking at. Ethan's eyes flicked to Lauren, then back to the code. He understood enough of adult euphemism to know this meant doors closing and conversations moving to rooms without windows. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. He didn't want to be the center of a secret. He wanted to be the kid who solved a puzzle and got a cookie. Doctor. Clark crouched beside him so they were eye level. Ethan, you did something extraordinary. From here, we need to be careful and thorough. That means we'll move a little slower and talk a little quieter. But you're not being pushed out. You're part of this. He nodded, throat tight. Okay, Mr. Alvarez's words floated up from memory. Hardware is truth. Software is poetry. You need both. Ethan looked at the hardware. The monitors, the sealed racks, the blinking hearts of machines that didn't sleep. Then he looked at his code, his poem. He had written a stanza that might have called across light years. Patterns had always made him feel safe. But this pattern made him feel seen. From the hall, someone whispered, "He's 9, and NASA froze." The whisper traveled, an urban legend being born in real time. Ethan's face warmed. He wished he could disappear and also hoped the words were true enough to be worth the embarrassment. Dr. Clark stood. Okay, team, she said, voice crisp now. We're going to form a verification pod. Minimal members. Jenna, you're in. Carlos from signal processing. 2 from instrumentation. We lock down the data. We replicate across shifted windows. We run adversarial checks. Ethan, you'll be paired with me and Jenna. Lauren, you'll have a chair in the room whenever your son is here. Hales nodded, conceding the ground. And we brief upstairs. He glanced at Ethan. You'll hear parts of that. Not all. That's not a reflection on you. It's the world. Ethan swallowed. I understand. He didn't. Not fully. But he understood enough. The sky had changed. And when the sky changes, so does the ground. As the room slowly emptied, Lauren put a hand on his shoulder. You're still my kid, she whispered. I know, he said, and finally let himself lean back into her. Out there, beyond the sun and the friendly planets and the empty-looking dark, something had blinked. Whether it was a lighthouse or a shutter or a hand waving hello, or goodbye, he didn't know. But he had heard it. And once you hear a pattern, you can't unhear it. He turned back to the keyboard and saved his work with a file name that made him smile despite the knot in his chest. The conference room on the 4th floor had no windows. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't paranoia, either. It was policy. Information that could tilt the balance of science, or politics, or even faith, didn't belong in spaces where someone might glance in through the blinds. The table was oval, polished wood under cold white lights. A small American flag sat in the corner, its fabric unmoving despite the heavy hum of the HVAC. A projector on the ceiling clicked once, then twice, before warming up with a dim glow that painted the wall in pale blue. Dr. Jonathan Hales stood at the head of the table, jacket buttoned, posture stiff. His voice was calm but edged like the line of a scalpel. Let's be clear, he began. What happened in the Aquila lab yesterday doesn't leave this room. Not until we understand it. Around the table, 8 people sat in silence. Most were senior scientists, chosen because they knew how to be brilliant and discreet. Meredith Clark was there, hands clasped tightly on the table. Jenna, younger and less practiced at hiding her emotions, looked like she wanted to explode with excitement but was holding it in with both fists under the desk. And in the corner, in a seat pulled up from the wall, sat Ethan, with Lauren right beside him. He didn't quite belong here. He knew that. His sneakers tapped softly against the chair leg. But they had insisted he attend, partly because he was the only one who understood his filter well enough, partly because his mother wouldn't have agreed otherwise. Hales gestured at the projector. A plot appeared on the wall. a jagged wave of light intensity over time, noisy and meaningless to most people. Then a second line, smoother, more deliberate. Ethan's filter output. This, Hales said, is what we're dealing with. Doctor. Clark leaned forward. We verified across 3 different observation windows. Different calibration models, different baselines. The modulation persists. One of the older astrophysicists, Drive Patel, cleared his throat. Could it be instrumental noise? Sensor bleed. We tested that, Jenna jumped in. We ran it against blank fields, injected fake signals, compared across detectors. The structure survives. It's not noise. Patel frowned. Then maybe stellar activity, magnetic cycles, flares, oscillations. Not consistent, Ethan said, before he could stop himself. His voice came out softer than he wanted, but it made the room turn. If it were stellar oscillations, the frequency drift would follow predictable harmonics. It doesn't. It's like someone is adjusting it on purpose. Lauren's hand found his under the table. She squeezed gently, as if to say, "Careful, kid. You're playing in a room full of giants." Dr. Hales let the silence hang before speaking. Intentional modulation is one interpretation. It's not the only one. Sir, Drive, Clark said firmly, you've seen the residuals. This isn't a natural process we've modeled before. If it is natural, it's something we've never encountered. Either way, it's a discovery. And discoveries, Hales replied, can break things if they're handled poorly. Lauren broke her silence. You keep saying discovery like it's a bomb. Hales looked at her evenly. Sometimes it is. The projector shifted slides. This time it showed a compressed timeline, the modulation intervals over several weeks. The pattern wasn't just repeating, it was evolving. The gaps shortened, then lengthened, then shortened again in a way that looked familiar. Ethan's chest tightened. He leaned forward. That's binary. What do you mean, Doctor? Patel asked. Ethan pointed at the peaks and troughs. Short, long, short, long, short, long. It's not Morse exactly, but it's close enough to look like encoding. A ripple went through the room. Scientists didn't gasp, not out loud, but they shifted in their seats, exchanged glances, scribbled notes in margins they hadn't planned to write on. Doctor. Clark's eyes lit with something between fear and wonder. We could be looking at a signal. Hales held up a hand. Or we could be looking at coincidence. Human brains are pattern-hungry. We see order where none exists. We must rule out every natural explanation before we utter that word outside this room. The word was obvious. Ethan whispered it anyway. Alien. Lauren's grip on his hand tightened like steel. The room went still. Hales' jaw flexed, but he didn't scold the boy. He just exhaled slowly, then spoke as if dictating history. We form a verification pod. No leaks, no speculation, no press. Our job is to prove or disprove the non-natural hypothesis. Until then, this is classified. Dr. Clark nodded reluctantly. Agreed. Hales looked at Ethan. And you, do you understand what classified means? Ethan nodded. It means I can't tell anyone. Not even my friends. Not even my teacher. Good, Hales said. Then softer, almost like a father instead of a director. You shouldn't have to carry this, son. But you've started something none of us can stop. Ethan's stomach fluttered. He didn't know if it was pride or fear. Maybe both. Back in the lab, the verification pod began their work. The team was smaller now. Clark, Jenna, Patel, 2 engineers, and Ethan. They worked in 12-hour shifts, running simulations, cross-checking data, trying every angle to prove the modulation was an artifact. It wasn't. Every test they threw at it only sharpened the signal's edges. Noise collapsed, leaving a rhythm too precise, too stubborn to vanish. Like a voice refusing to be drowned out. One night, if you could call 2:37 a.m. night, Jenna rolled her chair next to Ethan's station. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her coffee cold. Do you get it? She whispered. Ethan blinked. Get what? This isn't supposed to happen, she said. We look at stars. Stars don't look back. Her words stuck to him like static. He stared at the screen, at the whisper of light that had crossed unimaginable distances. And for the first time, the patterns didn't make him feel safe. They made him feel small. Like maybe the universe was watching.